You're embarrassing Dad's memory with this behavior." The words sliced through the elegant dining room of the Norwegian Star like a blade. I stood frozen, my champagne flute halfway to my lips, watching my mother's face contort with fury as she pointed directly at me. Around us, hundreds of other cruise passengers continued their conversations, blissfully unaware that my carefully planned $15,000 family reunion was imploding in real time. My younger sister Madison sat beside Mom, her perfectly manicured fingers intertwined with those of her boyfriend Derek. The same Derek who wasn't supposed to be here, who had somehow materialized in our family suite this morning, with a sheepish grin and Madison's breathless explanation that surprises make everything more fun. The same Derek who had spent the last 3 hours loudly criticizing every restaurant choice, every excursion I'd booked, and every carefully researched detail of this trip I'd spent 8 months planning. "Just leave, Emily," Mom continued, her voice carrying that particular edge I knew meant there was no coming back from this moment. "Stop ruining this for Madison. Your father would be ashamed of how selfish you're being." The mention of Dad's name hit like a physical blow. This entire cruise, the 7-day Caribbean voyage, the suite with the balcony he always dreamed of, the shore excursions to places he'd circled in travel magazines for decades, all of it was supposed to honor his memory. 6 months after losing him to a sudden heart attack, I thought bringing the family together on the trip he never got to take would help us heal. Instead, I was watching it crumble because I'd finally snapped when Derek suggested we skip the Cozumel ruins tomorrow to party at some beach club Madison found on Instagram. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was the one being called selfish, yet I was the one who had drained my savings account, used all my vacation days, and spent countless nights researching every detail to make this perfect. But as I looked at Mom's determined expression and Madison's satisfied smirk, I realized something that should have been obvious months ago. They didn't want the trip I'd planned. They wanted the trip they could take credit for, funded by money they didn't have to earn. "Fine," I said quietly, setting down my glass with surgical precision. The crystal made a soft clink against the white tablecloth, a sound so small yet so final. "I'll leave." I had arrived early to the cruise terminal that Tuesday morning, my stomach churning with excitement and nervous energy. Dad had been gone for exactly 6 months and 2 days, and I'd spent every one of those days missing his laugh, his terrible dad jokes, and his infectious enthusiasm for travel shows. He used to pause the TV whenever a cruise commercial came on, pointing at the screen with childlike wonder. "Look at that, Em," he'd say. "Someday we're all going to do that together, the whole family, just floating in the middle of the ocean with nowhere to be but happy." The someday never came for him, but I was determined to make it happen for the rest of us. I'd researched this specific cruise line for months, reading reviews, comparing amenities, studying deck plans until I could navigate the ship in my sleep. The Norwegian Star's Eastern Caribbean route would take us to St. Thomas, Tortola, and Cozumel. 3 destinations Dad had bookmarked in his travel folder, the one he kept in his desk drawer labeled Future Adventures. I'd upgraded us to a family suite with a balcony, booked specialty dining reservations at restaurants Dad would have loved, and carefully planned shore excursions that balanced relaxation with the historical sites he'd always wanted to explore. The total cost was $14,847, not including flights, not including the $2,000 I'd quietly set aside for extras, spa treatments for Mom, shopping money for Madison, and enough buffer to ensure no one felt restricted by budget concerns. My marketing director's salary could handle it, barely, if I didn't eat out for 6 months and postponed the kitchen renovation I'd been planning. Small sacrifices for something this important. What I hadn't planned for was Derek. Madison had mentioned casually, 2 weeks before departure, that Derek was bummed he couldn't come. I'd explained gently that the reservation was for 3 people, that changing it now would incur massive fees, and that this was meant to be immediate family only, a chance for the 3 of us to process Dad's death together and honor his memory. Madison had pouted, but seemed to accept it. Then, yesterday morning, as I was doing final packing and confirming our transportation to the port, my phone rang. Madison, calling from the Miami airport. "Surprise!" she'd squealed into the phone. "Derek's frequent flyer miles came through last minute. He's here with me. Isn't this amazing?" My heart had dropped into my stomach. "Madison, we can't just add someone to the cruise booking. The room is set up for 3 people, all the dining reservations." Oh my God, Emily. Don't be such a control freak, she'd interrupted. The cruise line will figure it out. Derek says people change bookings all the time. It's not like you can't afford an extra person anyway. I should have stood my ground right then. Should have explained that this wasn't about money or control, but about the sacred nature of what we were trying to do. Instead, I'd spent 2 frantic hours on the phone with the cruise line, paying $800 in change fees and upgrade costs to move us to a larger suite that could accommodate 4 people. I'd lost our original balcony cabin, the one with the specific view Dad had admired in the brochure, and had to settle for an interior room on a lower deck. But I told myself it would be worth it if it made Madison happy, if it kept the peace, if it allowed us to focus on what really mattered, being together and remembering Dad. The warning signs appeared immediately after Derek's arrival. As we stood in line to board the ship, he complained loudly about the crowd, the heat, and the corporate cattle call vibe of the embarkation process. While I handed over our documentation and tried to maintain my excitement about the trip, Derek made sarcastic comments about rich people playing poor for a week and floating hotels for people too lazy to plan real vacations. Madison giggled at his observations as if they were brilliant social commentary rather than insulting dismissals of something I'd poured my heart into planning. When I gently mentioned that Dad had always dreamed of taking a cruise, Derek had snorted and said, "Yeah, well, dead people dream about a lot of things that don't make sense to the living." The silence that followed was deafening. Madison's face flushed, but she said nothing to defend Dad's memory. Mom, who had been chatting with another passenger, missed the comment entirely. I felt something shift inside me, a small crack in the foundation of patience I'd built for this trip. Our suite, when we finally reached it, was smaller than I'd hoped, but still comfortable. 2 bedrooms with a shared living area and, thankfully, still that balcony, though it faced the ship's wake rather than the endless horizon Dad had wanted to see. I tried to maintain my enthusiasm as I showed everyone the amenities, the welcome champagne I'd arranged, the itinerary folder I'd prepared with detailed information about each port. Derek immediately flopped onto the sofa and started scrolling through his phone. "The Wi-Fi is garbage," he announced. "How am I supposed to post anything? Madison, didn't you say this was supposed to be luxury?" "It is luxury," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "The internet can be spotty at sea, but that's part of the charm. We're supposed to disconnect and—" "Disconnect?" Derek laughed, looking up from his phone with mock horror. Honey, some of us have businesses to run. Some of us can't just throw money around and pretend the real world doesn't exist." The casual condescension in his voice made my chest tighten. Madison said nothing, already busy taking selfies by the balcony window. Mom was in the bathroom, unpacking her toiletries, and missed the exchange entirely. That first evening's dinner should have been magical. I'd reserved a table at the ship's specialty steakhouse, Cagney's, because Dad had always wanted to try dry-aged beef and Mom loved upscale dining experiences. The restaurant was elegant, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean and soft jazz playing in the background. But Derek spent the entire meal loudly declaring that the prices were insane for cafeteria food and making jokes about captive audiences who'll pay anything for mediocre meat. When our server, a sweet young woman from the Philippines, tried to explain the wine pairings I'd pre-selected, Derek interrupted her to demand, "Something that doesn't cost more than my car payment." I watched Mom's face grow increasingly uncomfortable as other diners glanced our way. Madison, caught between embarrassment and loyalty to her boyfriend, kept shooting me pleading looks as if I could somehow make Derek's behavior acceptable through sheer force of will. "Maybe we could just enjoy the atmosphere," I suggested quietly. "Dad would have loved this place." Derek set down his fork with deliberate force. "You know what your dad would have really loved? Not having his family throw away thousands of dollars on guilt trips disguised as vacations." The words hung in the air like smoke. Mom's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Madison stared at her plate, suddenly fascinated by the pattern on the china. "This isn't a guilt trip," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "This is something Dad specifically wanted us to do together. As a family." "Right," Derek smirked, leaning back in his chair. "And conveniently, it's something that requires his daughter to play sugar mama for everyone else. Funny how honoring his memory looks exactly like Emily showing off how much money she makes." The accusation hit like a slap. I felt my face flush hot, not with embarrassment, but with anger, clean, bright anger that cut through months of grief and self-doubt. "That's enough," I said quietly, but Derek wasn't finished. "I'm just saying, if you really wanted to honor his memory, maybe you'd have asked what everyone else wanted instead of planning some fantasy trip that makes you feel important. Madison finally spoke, her voice small and uncertain. Derek, maybe what? He continued. Maybe we should all pretend this isn't weird, that Emily dragging us on her depression cruise is somehow healthy? Depression cruise. The phrase echoed in my head as I looked around the beautiful restaurant, at the other families laughing and celebrating, at the life Dad would never get to live. I thought about the travel brochures still tucked in his desk drawer, about his excitement every time a cruise commercial came on TV, about the way he'd light up when he talked about someday adventures with his girls. This wasn't a depression cruise. This was love, expressed in the only way I knew how. This was grief transformed into something beautiful, something Dad would have treasured, and Derek was systematically destroying it with every word that came out of his mouth. I stood up from the table, my napkin falling to the floor. Where are you going? Mom asked, her voice sharp with the same tone she'd used when Madison and I were children fighting in public. To get some air, I said, before I say something I can't take back. As I walked toward the restaurant's exit, I heard Derek's voice behind me, stage whispering to Madison. See? Drama queen, just like always. Some people can't handle being called out on their bullshit. I made it to the ship's deck before the tears came. Standing at the rail, watching the dark ocean stretch endlessly in all directions, I finally understood what I'd been trying so hard not to see. This trip was never going to be what I'd hoped. Not because of Derek, not because of changed plans or accommodations, but because the people I was trying to honor Dad's memory with had fundamentally different ideas about what his memory was worth. The second day started with what I hoped would be a fresh beginning. We were docking in St. Thomas, and I had arranged a private island tour that would take us to Megan's Bay. The beach Dad had circled in red ink in his travel magazine, with a note that said, Emily would love the snorkeling here. I'd hired a local guide, researched the best spots for photos, and even packed the underwater camera Dad had bought but never used. I woke early and found Mom on our suite's balcony, coffee in hand, watching the island emerge from the morning mist. For a moment, it felt like the peaceful family bonding I'd envisioned. It's beautiful, she said softly. Your father would have been up at dawn taking pictures. He would have made us all pose for 100 shots, I agreed, settling into the chair beside her. Remember how he used to say that if you didn't document an adventure, it was like it never happened? Mom smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her since we'd boarded. He had 3 cameras for our trip to Yellowstone. 3. As if one might not capture the full majesty of nature. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, and I felt a flutter of hope. Maybe today would be different. Maybe we could find our way back to the reason we were here. Then Derek emerged from the second bedroom, already complaining. Jesus Christ, what time do boats start honking their horns around here? He grumbled, rubbing his eyes dramatically. I feel like I'm sleeping next to a construction site. Those are ship horns, I explained patiently. It's how vessels communicate in port. It's actually quite fascinating. Derek cut me off. Emily, you know what would be fascinating? Sleeping past 6 a.m. on vacation. Madison appeared behind him, already dressed but looking torn between apologizing for her boyfriend and defending him. It was a look I'd become familiar with over the past 18 months they'd been dating, the expression of someone constantly caught between 2 loyalties. So what's the plan today? Madison asked, clearly trying to redirect the conversation. I pulled out the folder I'd prepared for St. Thomas, complete with maps, timelines, and backup options. Our private tour starts at 9:30. We'll visit Megan's Bay first, Dad's #1 pick. Then we have time for shopping in Charlotte Amalie before... Private tour? Derek interrupted. How much is that costing? I felt my jaw tighten. It's included in the trip budget. That's not what I asked. Derek, Madison said softly, placing a hand on his arm. Can we just what? Just pretend money doesn't matter? Just ignore that your sister is hemorrhaging cash trying to buy herself a family experience? Mom set down her coffee cup with more force than necessary. Derek, that's enough. Emily planned this trip for all of us. Emily planned this trip for Emily, Derek shot back. Everything has to be exactly how she wants it, on her timeline, following her research. When's the last time anyone asked what Madison wanted to do? Or you, Catherine? It's the Emily Show, funded by Emily's guilt money. The phrase guilt money landed like a physical blow. I stared at Derek, this man who had contributed exactly $0 and zero effort to this trip, who had inserted himself into our family's grief process uninvited, and who now had the audacity to psychoanalyze my motivations. "You know what?" I said, standing up so quickly my chair scraped against the balcony floor. "You're right. This is exactly how I want it. Because I'm the one who planned it, I'm the one who paid for it, and I'm the one who cared enough about Dad's memory to make it happen." "There it is," Derek said with satisfaction, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. The real Emily, the control freak who bought herself a captive audience. "Derek, stop," Madison pleaded, but her voice lacked conviction. "Why should I stop? Someone needs to point out how messed up this dynamic is. Your sister waves money around like a magic wand and expects everyone to dance to her tune. It's manipulative." Manipulative? The word echoed in my head as I looked at Mom, hoping for some defense, some acknowledgement of how unfair Derek's characterization was. Instead, I saw her looking uncomfortable, embarrassed by the confrontation, but not particularly inclined to take sides. "I think," Mom said carefully, "we should all take a step back and remember why we're here." "Why are we here?" Derek asked pointedly. "Because Emily decided we needed to be? Because she thinks throwing money at grief makes it go away?" I felt something break inside me, not just anger, but something deeper. The realization that I was fighting for something that maybe wasn't worth fighting for. That maybe Derek was wrong about my motivations, but he wasn't wrong about the fundamental dysfunction of our family dynamic. "You want to know why we're here?" I said quietly. "We're here because 6 months ago, my father, Madison's father, Mom's husband, died suddenly at 58 years old. We're here because he spent his entire adult life talking about taking his family on a cruise someday, and someday never came. We're here because I thought, foolishly, apparently, that honoring his memory by finally taking that trip together might help us process our grief and feel connected to him and to each other." I paused, looking directly at Derek. "We're not here because I'm a control freak or because I have guilt money or because I need to buy people's affection. We're here because I love my family and I miss my father and I wanted to do something beautiful in his honor." Derek shrugged, unmoved. "That's a nice speech, but it doesn't change the fact that you're using money to control how everyone experiences their own grief." Before I could respond, Madison spoke up. "Actually, Derek, I've been thinking." She paused, glancing between him and me. "Maybe we should do our own thing today. I saw this amazing beach club on Instagram, Koki Beach, and they have jet ski rentals and beach parties. It looks way more fun than a boring historical tour." The casual dismissal of Dad's carefully chosen destination as boring felt like a knife between my ribs. Megan's Bay wasn't just a beach. It was the specific place Dad had dreamed of visiting, the spot he'd researched and marked and talked about with excitement. It was sacred ground in the geography of his unlived dreams. "Madison," I said slowly, "this tour includes Megan's Bay. It was Dad's number one." "I know," she interrupted, "but Dad's not here, Emily. We are. And Derek's right. This whole trip has been about what you think Dad would have wanted instead of what we actually want." The betrayal in those words was complete. Not just Madison siding with Derek, but the casual dismissal of Dad's wishes as irrelevant now that he was gone. As if his dreams died with him, as if honoring them was just an indulgence on my part rather than a sacred duty. Mom remained silent, staring out at the ocean as if she could find answers in the horizon line. "Fine," I said finally. "You want to do your own thing? Do your own thing. I'll meet you back on the ship." "Emily," Mom said, finally speaking up, "don't be dramatic. We can compromise." "Compromise?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I've been compromising since Derek showed up uninvited. I compromised on the cabin when he needed to be accommodated. I compromised on the dining reservations when he complained about the prices. I compromised on the ambiance last night when he spent dinner insulting the restaurant I'd carefully chosen. What exactly have you compromised on?" The question hung in the air, unanswered, because we all knew the truth. I was the only one who had been bending, accommodating, adjusting my carefully laid plans to make room for someone who had no respect for what I was trying to create. "You know what your problem is?" Derek said, leaning back in his chair with smug confidence. "You think money equals love? You think if you spend enough, plan enough, control enough, you can force people to feel what you want them to feel. But grief doesn't work that way. Family doesn't work that way. I stared at him. This man who had never lost a parent, who had never spent sleepless nights missing someone's voice, who had never felt the desperate need to keep someone's memory alive through action. He spoke about grief with the authority of someone who had never experienced its weight. "You're right," I said quietly. "I can't force anyone to feel anything. I can't make you respect Dad's memory. I can't make Madison care about the places he wanted to visit. And I can't make Mom defend the choice I made to honor him." I stood up, gathering the folder of carefully planned itineraries and research. "So I'll stop trying." As I walked toward the suite's door, I heard Derek say to Madison, "Finally, now we can have some actual fun." The words followed me into the hallway, where I stood for a moment collecting myself before walking to the elevator. I wasn't going to Coki Beach. I wasn't going to compromise anymore. I was going to Magens Bay, to the place Dad had circled in red ink, and I was going to honor his memory the way it deserved to be honored, even if I had to do it alone. The taxi ride to Magens Bay gave me time to think, though I'm not sure thinking was what I needed. The driver, a cheerful local man named Marcus, tried to make conversation about the island's history and the best spots for photos, but I found myself only half listening. My mind kept replaying the conversation on the balcony, Derek's words about money and control echoing like a song I couldn't get out of my head. Maybe he was right about some things. Maybe I did try to control situations through planning and financial investment. But what was the alternative? Let everything fall apart? Allow Dad's memory to be honored with a beach party and jet skis rather than the meaningful experience he'd actually dreamed of? Magens Bay was everything Dad had promised it would be. The beach curved in a perfect crescent, white sand meeting impossibly blue water under a sky so clear it looked painted. I stood at the edge of the beach for a long moment, holding the underwater camera he'd never gotten to use, and felt his presence more strongly than I had since the funeral. This was worth fighting for. This moment, this place, this connection to his dreams. It mattered more than Derek's cynicism or Madison's Instagram preferences or Mom's uncomfortable silence. I spent 3 hours at Magens Bay. I snorkeled among tropical fish that Dad would have tried to photograph from every angle. I sat on the sand reading one of his favorite travel books that I'd brought along. I called his old cell phone number just to hear his voicemail greeting one more time, the cheerful, "Hey there, I'm probably off having an adventure, but leave me a message and I'll call you back when I surface." He never would surface, of course. But for those 3 hours, surrounded by the beauty he'd dreamed of sharing with us, I felt closer to him than I had in months. When I returned to the ship around 4 p.m., I found Mom sitting alone in our suite's living area, looking unusually contemplative. Madison and Derek were nowhere to be seen. "How was your beach club?" I asked, setting down my bag and pulling out the photos I'd taken with Dad's camera. "We didn't go," Mom said quietly. "Derek got food poisoning from something he ate at breakfast. Madison stayed with him." I looked up from the camera, surprised. "Is he okay?" "He'll be fine, probably just his system adjusting to different food." Mom paused, then added, "I went shopping instead. Bought your father that ridiculous Tommy Bahama shirt he always said he'd get if we ever went somewhere tropical." She pulled out a shopping bag and showed me a bright blue shirt with palm trees and hibiscus flowers. Exactly the kind of loud, vacation-appropriate clothing Dad had always admired but never bought for himself, because he said it was too frivolous. "He would have worn it to every barbecue for the next 10 years, I said, smiling despite myself. "And insisted it made him look like a local island guy," Mom added, her own smile breaking through, even though he was the palest man in Minnesota. We sat quietly for a moment, both holding pieces of Dad, his camera full of new memories in my hands, his imaginary shirt in hers. "Emily," Mom said finally, "I owe you an apology." I looked up, surprised by the serious tone in her voice. "Derek was out of line this morning, and I should have said something. I should have defended you and this trip, and what you're trying to do." She paused, smoothing the shirt in her lap. "I think I've been so afraid of dealing with my own grief that I've been letting other people's drama distract me from what really matters." "Mom, no, let me finish." She took a shaky breath. Your father would have loved today. Not the beach club, not the jet skis, but what you actually did. He would have been so proud of you for going to Megan's Bay alone, for taking his camera, for making sure his dreams got honored, even when the rest of us lost sight of what we were supposed to be doing. The validation I'd been craving finally came, but it felt bittersweet. Too little, too late, after I'd already had to defend myself against accusations of manipulation and control. Derek thinks I'm trying to buy people's feelings, I said quietly. Derek is a 26-year-old boy who's never lost anyone important, Mom replied with more steel in her voice than I'd heard all trip. He doesn't understand that sometimes love looks like planning, that sometimes grief looks like action, that sometimes honoring someone means spending money and time and energy to make their dreams come true. Before I could respond, the suite door opened and Madison walked in, looking tired and subdued. "How's Derek?" Mom asked. "Sleeping it off," Madison said, slumping into one of the chairs. "He's been pretty miserable all day." "I'm sorry he got sick," I said, meaning it despite everything. Madison looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Emily, can we talk? Just us?" Mom stood up, gathering the Tommy Bahama shirt. "I'll go check on Derek. Give you girls some privacy." After she left, Madison and I sat in silence for a moment. Through the balcony window, I could see other passengers returning from their shore excursions, laughing and comparing photos. "I messed up," Madison said finally. "Derek was awful this morning, and I should have told him to stop. I should have backed you up." "Why didn't you?" She was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. "Because it's easier to let him criticize you than to deal with him being mad at me. Which is horrible, I know, but he gets so intense when he thinks I'm not supporting him." The admission hung between us like a confession. I felt a flash of concern for my sister that had nothing to do with our family dynamics, and everything to do with the relationship pattern she was describing. "Madison, that's not—" "I know," she cut me off. "I know it's not healthy. I know I shouldn't have to choose between my boyfriend and my family. But it's complicated." "It's not complicated," I said gently. "You're in a relationship with someone who demands you isolate yourself from people who love you. That's not complicated, it's textbook." Madison's eyes filled with tears. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't see what's happening? But I love him, Emily, and he's not always like this. When it's just us, he's different." I recognized the script, the same one I'd heard from friends in toxic relationships, the same rationalizations and excuses that kept people trapped in patterns they knew were destructive. "Madison," I said carefully, "what would Dad think of how Derek talks to you? To our family?" The question hit its mark. Madison's face crumpled as she started crying in earnest. "Dad would hate him," she whispered. "Dad would have thrown him off this ship by now." We both knew it was true. Dad had been protective of his daughters in a healthy way, the kind of father who taught us to expect respect and kindness from the people in our lives. He would have taken one look at Derek's dismissive attitude and manipulative behavior and shown him the door. "I miss Dad so much," Madison continued through her tears. "And I know this trip was supposed to help with that, but Derek made everything about him and his problems and his opinions. I let him ruin it." I moved to sit beside her on the sofa, putting my arm around her shoulders. "You didn't ruin anything. Derek did. And there's still time to salvage this." "How?" "He's made it clear he thinks this whole trip is stupid. He's going to complain about every single thing we do. Then maybe he doesn't need to be part of what we do." Madison looked up at me, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I mean, tomorrow we're in Tortola. Dad circled the botanical gardens and the rum distillery tour. We could do those things, just the three of us, like the trip was originally planned. Derek can stay on the ship and recover from his food poisoning." "He won't like that." "Madison, do you care more about what Derek likes or about honoring Dad's memory?" It was a direct question that cut through all the rationalizations and excuses. Madison stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Dad's memory," she said quietly. "Dad's memory matters more." That evening, we had dinner as a family, just Mom, Madison, and me. Derek claimed he was still too sick to join us, which was probably true, but also convenient. We went to the ship's main dining room and ordered dishes Dad would have enjoyed, sharing stories about his adventurous eating habits and his tendency to order the most exotic thing on any menu. For the first time since we'd boarded, the conversation flowed naturally. Madison talked about the business degree she was considering, inspired by Dad's entrepreneurial spirit. Mom shared memories of their early dating years when Dad would plan elaborate romantic adventures on tiny budgets. I showed them the photos from Megan's Bay, and Mom's eyes filled with tears when she saw the underwater shots Dad would have treasured. Tomorrow, Mom said as we were finishing dessert, we're doing the botanical gardens. All of us, together. Madison nodded firmly. Derek can stay on the ship. This is family time. I felt a surge of hope. Maybe we could still salvage this trip. Maybe Derek's toxic influence could be contained long enough for us to find our way back to each other and to Dad's memory. I should have known it wouldn't be that simple. The explosion came at breakfast the next morning. Madison had apparently told Derek about our plan to explore Tortola without him, and he did not take the news well. I was on the balcony with my coffee, reviewing the botanical gardens information, when I heard raised voices from inside the suite. Derek's voice was carrying through the closed bedroom door, his tone sharp and accusatory. So what? I'm just supposed to sit here like a sick dog while you run off to play happy family with your control freak sister? Derek, please keep your voice down, Madison pleaded. You said you were too sick to do anything today anyway. That's not the point. The point is you're choosing them over me. Again. I tried to focus on my notes about the rare orchid species we'd see at the gardens, Dad's particular area of interest, but Derek's voice was impossible to ignore. Your sister has had it out for me since day one, he continued. She can't stand that you have someone in your life who sees through her manipulation. That's not true. Isn't it? Think about it, Madison. Every time we have plans, Emily suddenly needs something. Every time you start to pull away from their dysfunction, she throws money around and creates some crisis that requires the whole family to rally around her. My hands tightened on my coffee mug. The accusation was so far from reality it was almost laughable, except Madison's silence suggested she might be listening. This whole trip is just another example, Derek pressed on. She planned it without asking what anyone else wanted. She's controlling every detail, and now she's trying to exclude me because I had the audacity to point out how messed up it all is. She planned it to honor our father, Madison said, but her voice lacked conviction. She planned it to make herself feel important, to be the center of attention, and you're falling for it. I stood up from my chair, every instinct telling me to march inside and defend myself, but something held me back. Maybe the recognition that this argument wasn't really about me. It was about Derek's need to isolate Madison from her family, his obvious discomfort with any situation he couldn't control. The bedroom door opened and Madison emerged, looking pale and shaken. Behind her, Derek appeared in the doorway, still in his pajamas but clearly feeling well enough to wage psychological warfare. "Morning, Emily," he said with false cheer. "I hear you're planning another fun family adventure without me." "You said you were too sick to leave the ship," I replied evenly. "Funny how my health is suddenly relevant when it's convenient for you." Mom appeared from her bedroom, taking in the tense atmosphere with one glance. "What's going on?" "Emily's trying to exclude Derek from our family activities," Madison said quietly, not meeting anyone's eyes. The betrayal in that statement hit like a physical blow. After our conversation yesterday, after Madison's tears and her admission that Dad would have hated Derek, she was back to defending him and painting me as the aggressor. "That's not what happened," I said calmly. "Derek said he was too sick to join us. I suggested we proceed with our planned activities since Dad specifically wanted to visit the botanical gardens." "See?" Derek jumped in. "Everything has to be about her dead father's wishes. God forbid we make any decisions based on what the living people in this family actually want." The casual cruelty of her dead father made Mom gasp audibly. Even Madison looked shocked by Derek's phrasing. "That's enough," Mom said sharply. "Derek, you need to—" "I need to what? Pretend this isn't completely insane? Pretend it's normal for a grown woman to drag her family on a grief tour and then throw tantrums when people don't perform their roles correctly?" "Nobody's throwing tantrums," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "Really? Because storming off yesterday when people didn't want to follow your itinerary seemed pretty tantrum-like to me." I left because you were being disrespectful to my father's memory and to the trip I planned in his honor. Your father's memory doesn't require everyone else to be miserable, Derek shot back. And planning an expensive guilt trip doesn't make you daughter of the year. That was the moment Mom finally snapped. Get out! She screamed, her voice echoing through the suite with a force that made us all freeze. Get out of our cabin! Get off this ship! Get out of our family! Derek's smug expression faltered for the first time since he'd arrived. Catherine, you can't be serious. I am dead serious, Mom continued, her voice shaking with fury. You are a guest on this trip, an uninvited guest who has done nothing but disrespect my late husband's memory and attack my daughter who spent months planning something beautiful for our family. Madison stepped forward, tears already streaming down her face. Mom, please, you can't just watch me, Mom said, turning to face Madison with an expression I'd never seen before. Madison, you have a choice to make right now. You can be part of this family and honor your father's memory with us, or you can follow this man who thinks grief is negotiable and love is conditional. The ultimatum hung in the air like smoke. Derek laughed, but it sounded forced, desperate. This is insane, he said, looking between Mom and Madison. You're seriously going to choose a dead man's wishes over your daughter's happiness? I'm choosing my family, Mom replied. Something you clearly don't understand. Derek turned to Madison, his expression shifting from arrogance to something closer to panic. Madison, come on. You're not going to let them manipulate you like this. We can fly home today. Get off this floating nursing home. Stop, Madison whispered, so quietly we almost missed it. Madison, Derek pressed. You know this is crazy. You know your family is dysfunctional. Don't let them— Stop! Madison screamed, the word exploding from her like a physical force. Just stop talking. Stop making everything about you. Stop trying to make me choose. Stop disrespecting my father. Derek's face went white. In all the time I'd known him, I'd never seen Madison stand up to him so directly. My father is dead, Madison continued, her voice breaking. He's never coming back. I will never get to show him my wedding dress or introduce him to his grandchildren or hear him give another terrible dad joke. And my sister who I treated like garbage yesterday. My sister spent 8 months and $15,000 trying to give us 1 week to feel close to him again. She turned to look at me, tears streaming down her face. Emily, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I let him talk about Dad that way. I'm sorry I didn't defend you. I'm sorry I almost threw away this gift you gave us. Then she turned back to Derek, and her voice became steel. We're done. I want you off this ship at the next port. Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Madison, you can't be serious. After everything we've been through. What we've been through is you slowly isolating me from everyone who loves me, Madison said with clarity I hadn't heard from her in months. What we've been through is you making me feel guilty for caring about my family. What we've been through is you turning me into someone my father wouldn't recognize. She walked over to the suite's phone and picked up the receiver. I'm calling the guest services desk. They can help you arrange transportation off the ship when we dock in Tortola. Derek looked around the room like a cornered animal, his gaze landing on each of us in turn. When he realized no one was going to rescue him, his expression shifted from panic to ugly rage. Fine, he spat, but don't come crawling back to me when you realize your precious family is just as messed up as I said they were. Don't call me when Emily's next control trip makes you miserable. And don't expect me to pretend this never happened. He stormed into the bedroom and began throwing his belongings into his suitcase with violent efficiency. We could hear him muttering under his breath, cursing our family, cursing the trip, cursing Madison's stupid loyalty to dead people. 20 minutes later, he emerged with his packed bag, looking around the suite one last time with undisguised contempt. You'll regret this, he said to Madison. All of you. When the grief wears off and you're stuck with each other's dysfunction, you'll remember that I was the only one telling you the truth. Madison stood by the balcony door, her arms wrapped around herself, but her voice was steady when she spoke. The truth is that you never loved me enough to respect the people who made me who I am, and I finally love myself enough to notice. Derek left without another word, the suite door slamming behind him with such force that a picture frame rattled on the wall. We stood in the sudden silence for a long moment, processing what had just happened. Then Madison collapsed into Mom's arms, sobbing with what sounded like relief as much as grief. I'm sorry, she kept repeating. I'm so sorry I let him stay. I'm sorry I didn't see what he was doing. I'm sorry I hurt you, Emily. I joined their embrace, feeling something fundamental shift back into place in our family dynamic. "You don't need to apologize," I said. "You figured it out. That's what matters." 2 hours later, we were walking through the botanical gardens in Tortola, just the three of us, like the trip was always meant to be. Madison pointed out flowers she thought Dad would have photographed. Mom read aloud from the guidebook in the dramatic voice Dad used whenever he played tour guide on family trips, and I finally felt the peace I'd been searching for since we'd left Miami. At the orchid greenhouse, Dad's circled must-see destination, we found a bench overlooking the most spectacular display of tropical flowers any of us had ever seen. Madison pulled out her phone and set it up for a selfie. "Wait," she said, just before taking the picture. "Emily, what was that thing Dad always said before photos?" I smiled, remembering. "Adventure documented is adventure doubled." "Adventure documented is adventure doubled," we said in unison, just as the camera clicked. Looking at that photo later, I saw 3 women who had found their way back to each other, and to the memory of the man who had taught them that love sometimes means planning adventures for people who matter to you, even when they can't be there to enjoy them. The rest of our cruise unfolded like a completely different trip. Without Derek's toxic presence poisoning every interaction, we rediscovered the joy of being together as a family. Our final port day in Cozumel was everything I had dreamed it could be. We explored the Mayan ruins Dad had been fascinated by, swam in cenotes he'd researched for hours online, and bought the ridiculously large sombrero he'd always joked about bringing home from Mexico. Madison threw herself into experiencing everything with the enthusiasm of someone making up for lost time. She snorkeled for the first time, tried local foods Dad would have ordered without hesitation, and filled her phone with photos she planned to print and add to Dad's travel scrapbook. Mom, freed from the stress of managing Derek's constant complaints, relaxed in a way I hadn't seen since Dad's funeral. On our last night aboard the ship, we sat on our balcony sharing stories about Dad and planning our next adventure, because there would be a next one. The trip that had started as a memorial had become something more, a reclamation of our family identity, and a promise to keep Dad's spirit of adventure alive. "I keep thinking about what Derek said," Madison admitted as we watched the ocean stretch endlessly in all directions. "About this being a guilt trip, about you trying to control how we grieve." "And?" I asked gently. "And I think he was wrong about the guilt part, but maybe not completely wrong about the control part." Madison looked at me directly. "You do try to manage situations, Emily. You do try to solve problems by planning and spending money." I felt a familiar defensive response rising, but I pushed it down. "You're probably right." "But," Madison continued, "the difference is that you do it because you love us. Derek tried to control me because he wanted to own me. You plan things because you want to take care of people. It's not the same thing at all." Mom nodded in agreement. "Your father was the same way. He showed love through action, through making sure everyone had what they needed to be happy and safe and fulfilled." "I miss him so much," I said, the words coming out more raw than I'd intended. "Me too," Madison whispered. "But Em, this trip, being here with you two, seeing the places he wanted to see, doing the things he wanted to do, it makes him feel closer somehow. Like part of him got to come with us after all." That night, I called the concierge and arranged for one final surprise. The next morning, as we packed our belongings and prepared to disembark, a crew member delivered a small package to our suite. Inside was a bottle of champagne and a note I'd had printed in the ship's business center. "For James Mitchell," the note read, "who taught his daughters that the best adventures are the ones you share with people you love, and that someday is just another word for right now if you're brave enough to make it happen. Thank you for raising women who know how to honor your memory by living fully. Until we meet again, Dad." We opened the champagne on our balcony and toasted Dad, the trip, and our renewed commitment to being the family he'd raised us to be. As the ship pulled into Miami's port for the last time, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Dad's death: complete peace with our family dynamic and genuine excitement for the future. The real surprise came 3 weeks later, when I was back home in Chicago going through the photos from our trip. I found a video on my phone that I didn't remember taking. Madison must have recorded it during one of our dinner conversations. In the clip, Mom was telling a story about Dad's obsession with travel documentaries, doing an impression of his dramatic narration voice that had us all laughing until we cried. But what struck me most was the sound of our laughter. Genuine, unforced, joyful. It was the sound of a family that had been through hell and found its way back to love. It was the sound Dad would have been proudest to hear. I sent the video to Madison and Mom with a simple message. Adventure documented is adventure doubled. Ready for the next one? Madison's response came immediately, already researching destinations Dad would have loved. But this time, we're planning it together. Mom's reply made me smile. Your father always said the best trips are the ones that bring you closer to the people you're traveling with. Mission accomplished. 6 months later, we took our second annual dad trip, a safari in Kenya that he'd dreamed about but never thought he could afford. Madison contributed to the cost this time, and Mom handled the research for cultural experiences Dad would have appreciated. I still did most of the logistical planning because that's how I show love, but now it felt like collaboration rather than obligation. And when we scattered some of Dad's ashes at a watering hole where elephants came to drink at sunset, something he'd said he wanted after watching too many nature documentaries, we knew we'd found the perfect way to keep his adventurous spirit alive while building new memories as the family he'd raised us to be. Some trips change you, some trips heal you. The best trips do both.